Welcome to the Life Launch Center's parenting workshop. Life Launch Centers, we're all about stronger families and stronger futures. We put on these parenting workshops once a month for the public. We also have the parent support group that our clients are part of, and they can get some additional help. So here it is. This is the big topic. We've done a little bit of lead up with a workshop last month, building up to disciplining kids. And man, am I glad to have Kimball here with us tonight, because this is a pretty heavy topic. And if there's a guy who would be able to share some wisdom and insight, it would be Kimball. So I would like to introduce Kimball. Maybe take a minute, Kimball, to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background.
I've been at this kind of work, was an adolescent with my own struggles that if Life Launch Center's been around, I think my family would have moved my way towards that. But I got some help from some people, helped myself, really wanted to give back. And so my education in my graduate school was focused towards particularly working with families of adolescents and young adults. And it's been over 40 years of this kind of work and running some programs. And I've been with Life Launch Center just this last while as I fell in love with the curriculum and the philosophies here. So awesome. I'm glad to join you tonight.
That's awesome. I appreciate that intro. And yeah, Kimball brings a lot of experience to our team and a lot of insight. And so we're going to just jump right in. We're going to try to cover this in about 35 to 40 minutes, hopefully. There's a lot to talk about, but Kimball's got some really great insights. So Kimball, tell us a little bit about, do any of us even have a chance? It seems like disciplining kids today is kind of a taboo topic, and people are not like disciplining almost is like a swear word. In fact, when I tried to put this out on Facebook, just the fact that I included the word disciplining, they flagged it. They red flagged it as though it were some special interest group thing, that the advertisement wasn't allowed until I at least suggested that somebody take a personal look at it to see that it's actually a positive thing rather than some punitive thing. So tell me, why disciplining? Tell me a little about, do any of us even have a chance?
Well, first, let's talk about the word disciplining. So there's a teaching parent model that Boys Town and some people have heavy research that basically shows that as you become a disciple of something, you learn and you teach, and we get taught by our kids get taught by us. And so disciplining in the more pure sense of the word is teaching kids. It's helping them to be able to understand how to navigate this life. It's giving them knowledge, and we all make changes. We get disciplined by Mother Nature. I learned how to take more warm gear with how the mornings have dropped with temperature wise. I went outside this morning to go on a little bit of a run and turned right back around and went in and got gloves and a hat. So I got disciplined. So disciplining in some ways is basically giving you feedback on how you can successfully manage and navigate life. And so as we discipline kids, it is for a purpose of equipping them to be able to be successful in life. I don't think that the other side of disciplining is that I get off on my power. And you will bend my will kind of a thing. That's not the kind of disciplining that we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of gets a bad rap. I mean, obviously self-discipline is highly respected, but maybe it's because there's been some problems and some skewing of what disciplining looks like with children, so that it's kind of got a bad name, but yeah. Honestly, oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and the other part of this, do any of us have a chance? So one of the things that we found is that each kid is different. They have different developmental pace to what's going on. They have different friend groups. There are different influences. There are birth order influences that hit in a family. There are biological considerations that will hit in a family. Families will move and the context changes from what was happening with the favorite teacher in 6th grade, who's now no longer there. And now the kid's in a middle school situation that was at the same age. So you really can't end up saying, I've got a full-on chance and I have a really set curriculum. It's not like chemistry where you know that when you mix certain chemicals that it's going to always happen in that predictable way. There are too many variables with us as we evolve and learn things, and as we maybe get more exhausted with our second or third or eighth kid than we are with our first kid. There are things that happen in our variables of jobs and our own stressors and our own health conditions. So, we have a chance, but you need to know that disciplining is a lot like it is to be a therapist. So I've been in practice for 40 years, and I don't know that I'll ever get to where I'm actually not practicing. We're always learning, and that's the same when it comes to disciplining. So we've got a shot at it, and we do have a chance, but that chance, the target keeps moving. Just be aware of that and cut yourself some slack.
Yeah.
That stuff that worked brilliantly with your oldest, it falls apart and actually can be counter therapeutic to maybe your youngest or to another in the family. But we do
Well,
have a chance. We're just keeping that in mind that it's tough.
well, and we kind of laid a groundwork last time with the last parenting workshop. So if any of you haven't seen that yet, it is on our website. It's called Connected Parenting. And a lot of what we're talking about tonight is highly dependent on your relationship with your kid and trying to establish a good connected relationship with them. So feel free to jump on the website and check that out. But Kimball, let's go ahead and jump into our first talking point here, which is establishing values. How does establishing values relate to disciplining your kids?
If I'm just kind of going through life with not any kind of specifics on what's crucial in my own life and in my kids' life, I don't have much of a direction, and I may be over dependent on the junior high teachers or a particular soccer coach or somebody else to bring those values into a situation. So values might be, our family values independence or self-sufficiency or integrity, that we act and talk the same way that we think, and that you can see there's a match between how I'm talking and how I act. Might be integrity for a family. If integrity is a big value, then as I'm disciplining or teaching, I'm working towards that being a match. And that may be the way in which I form my approaches to helping my kid. Self-reliance, the same kind of a thing. I do not want to be in a situation where my kid is not able to make an omelet by the age of 11, boy or girl, and they need to be able to know how to weed in a garden. Other people, the value might be service. And in our family, there's nobody in the family that ends up needing to be go through coronation, become the king or queen, and we all serve them, or that mom serves us all, or that so service may be something that's defined.
So
Families will usually have 3 or 4 key values, and from that you can inform how you discipline and how you focus in your family.
So how do you go about establishing those values? Is that something the parents pick out, or is it a collaborative effort? What do you recommend?
All of the above. That's really what you want to do is, at Lifeline Centers, we end up with a big score of values, and we actually do some forced choices with kids where it's like, all right, you got this list of about 40. We want you to get that down to 5. Now we want you to get that down to 2. What are the 2? Recently, I was with a younger group that was mainly younger girls, and respect and self-respect ended up being the prevailing, and love were their values. But when it came to that self-respect, suddenly they end up having to discipline themselves. Am I going to be in a situation where I'm being used in that relationship? If I have self-respect, am I going to live below my talents in a class? It's hard for them sometimes to make that leap. But if you don't have some particular values that your family's working towards and that you have some agreement on, it's like a car without a map. How am I going to get to a destination unless I've determined it? So we see values as being crucial in a family's focus.
That's awesome. Yeah, and I've seen that specifically with my kids, where you have a discussion with them and be like, hey, let's talk about what we value, as a family in our relationship. Here's what I value for myself. Just knowing that, like you said, gives direction to a family's, purpose and meaning, and kind of guides the conversation. So
if you get on Google and say family coat of arms, there'll be different templates. And it's been interesting. Some families will take that and build their own coat of arms. and it might say mercy and justice or integrity or fun or
That'd be cool.
service. And they'll illustrate that, and they'll end up putting that on their fridge. And some families have actually framed that and commissioned somebody to have a really cool looking coat of arms. So think about ways to where those values can be highlighted. It's not just that we did an exercise, we determined these things, but the more the more you're aware of those and mindful of those things, the better that you can now play off of that as you start to develop some standards and some guidelines and some rules for your family.
I love it. And when they're posted in the house, then it just becomes this standing reminder, hey, are we acting within, our value set? Is this something that's helping us move towards our values? So, well, let's talk about our second point, pre-planning. What do you mean with pre-planning and disciplining children?
I know with one of my daughters that if I hit her early in the day on a Saturday with, you can't go until you get these chores done, that when she was younger, that would create a crisis for her. If she knew that was coming up on a Tuesday, that on Saturday, and I'd already said, here's where we're going to be moving on those things, she may still create some of a crisis, but she was informed of it. She was already aware of it. And I can even predict some of how her actions are going to be. One of my kids would wear us down and create a crisis, and would usually do that right before there was going to be a family event.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm pre-planning, I can say, with this kid, we got this thing where everyone's going over to grandma's house, and he's going to delay, and he's going to create a bargaining chip with this thing. If I can pre-plan, I can predict that, and I can have a shot at saying, usually on Fridays when we go over there, here's what's going to be going on. Because of that, let's see if we can't get this thing done earlier in the week. And if that does happen, here's our plan. Two of us are going to go. One of us is going to stay here with you for a while, and we'll figure it out. I'm just giving a couple of general scenarios, but pre-planning, our kids are quite predictable. Which one's going to do the eye roll. Which one's going to be going to one of the parents over the other. When there's going to be a coalition of two kids against us. When a kid's going to come up missing when it's chores. Which kid's going to be the one that's actually going to clean up in the room versus is just going to leave it. Which one's going to be blaming another kid on it. We're observers. We live with them 24/7. So you can anticipate that these things are going to happen and do something about that before it happens. Most of it's like, he's doing that again. If I'm saying he's doing that again, it means that I already know that they do that regularly. So I can come up now with a plan to where I can sabotage, if you will, some of that doing as it is there again. So having some time away from kids is crucial in just discussing those things.
I can totally relate to that. And it seems like the things that I do, I don't know, you tell me if this is good or not, but is have a kind of a frank discussion with them before the Saturday rolls around and say, hey, I've noticed when Saturday comes around that if I, bring out the list of chores that you tend to react this way. Just want to be clear with you up front so that when that happens, we're not going to have, any conflict and that we have a good understanding. Is that fair? And is that the kind of planning you're talking about, or?
Yeah, that's a great example of it. It's how you deliver it too. Now, if I'm delivering in a really dismissive way, you always pitch fits on Friday, right when it gets to chore time.
Yeah.
Then I've almost kind of coaxed them into pitching a fit on Saturday. If it's like, you're so great with so many things, but it's like when it gets push on shove on Saturdays, that thing really hits us. And there's times where our whole family ends up getting put on hold. And I know you're not that kind of a kid that wants to hold
sabotage stuff.
So, I just want you to know we're aware of that thing. And, and if you choose to do that, we've kind of figured out some additional things that we can do to help support you. And, become those couple of things might not be too great, or can you come up with a solution as to how that wouldn't happen on a Saturday? So you don't get kind of the thrill out of kids think themselves as really spontaneous and being able to outflank us and outmaneuver us. And if you're predicting some of those behaviors, lots of times they won't want to give you the satisfaction of pitching that icky fit on a Saturday morning that they usually do. But it has to be done in a way that's respectful of them and not too demeaning or sarcastic. And that's sometimes hard for me. That's one of my tougher things,
Yeah.
is not doing the sarcasm with it.
Well, I love how you started it with some praise. You're like, hey, you're normally a really great kid. And I've noticed that on Saturdays, sometimes this thing comes up, but just want to avoid that so we can have some more harmony, and that is just that really calm addressing of the issue beforehand. Because I think you're right. Like, I tend to many times just jump in there and be like, here it is again, you're doing this thing again, and you haven't pre-planned, you're just reacting to the thing that happens all the time. That can be frustrating when you know that I should have pre-planned better as a parent. Well, let's talk a little bit about non-negotiables versus negotiables. Oh boy, that's what parenting and disciplining is all about, right? Negotiations here. Tell me what you mean with this.
Now, I don't know if that blue drink there is some kind of strange antifreeze alcohol mix or something on your PowerPoint.
It was a stock photo that it was illustrating some kids maybe drinking. And I threw that on there with the idea that this is a non-negotiable for my kids. Like, this is something that they know, like, we don't approve of, but I don't know, you tell me.
I mean, some people, a non-negotiable is usually a big time thing. I mean, if this was some Everclear mixed with a little food coloring or something, that's not ever happening in my house. And I'll bring out whatever supports I can from the police or the neighbors or your grandparents or whomever. There's some things that are just not negotiable. We're not going to be cohabitating, in this kind of a way. We're not going to be smoking pot in the basement. Some things are just non-negotiable. Some people, the non-negotiables will move into where there's some over rigidity. If you ever use the F-bomb in our house, you're shut down forever. Once in a while, maybe it's negotiable about that F-bomb because it could turn into a really powerful teaching moment. And if I come down way heavy on that, I might have chosen a non-negotiable that is more difficult to enforce and actually ends up with me in a peril. I'm not saying that I allow my kids to use the F-bomb in my house. That's not really a negotiable for me, but if it happened, I'm not going to react the same way as if they brought in a friend with a gun.
Yeah.
Or something of that sort. So there's some obvious for all of us. There's non-negotiables about physically attacking another family member. There's non-negotiables that we all have where it's just, this cannot happen. And they need to know that. It ties into the values. It ties into things that put other people at risk in a house.
So that it sounds a lot like I've heard parents often say, choose your battles. You've got to know which battles are like, absolutely, you've got to come through on them, but which ones are maybe a little bit more negotiable. I put that picture of the kid on the computer screen there because, man, that seems to be like something parents negotiate with their kids really heavily today. I mean, this is a big issue.
Yeah, it's a gigantic issue. And with there being such an expectation of kids out there, sometimes it can turn into a non-negotiable to where it's like, okay, this is really well enforced at my house, but now I get freedom, and they'll actually overdose on the freedom when they're on the bus or with their friends and they're sharing screens and some things that way. So how rigid I am on that may end up with me having the kid see that as such a restriction that they'll overcompensate when they have some freedom with it. So that will tie back into the values. This is not negotiable in our house, but you're going to probably have some temptations and stuff. How does that fit with self-respect or respect of other people when you're objectifying them? When that's the only way you get to know somebody is by looking at pornographic images of people. If you've got a relationship, you can have them looking through those things. And if I'm pre-planning on those things, I have a better shot at it. It's a really tough one. There was a program that I was asked to consult with. And when I got to the program, their rule manual said that everything was negotiable, and that the consequence depended on the situation and the kid and who they were with and how long they'd been in the program. It was a miserable program that closed down. We said, you can't have everything be negotiable. And some of these kids truly believe that they can negotiate driving the car when they're 14 and that there won't be any consequence for that. And I'm going to negotiate because I'm going to make it so miserable for you that you now have cut, you've now kind of caved in. And so now I've found out that it is negotiable for me to do some illegal stuff in the house or other places. So the more you get worn down, the more they get a message that everything's negotiable.
Yeah,
And
it
it's
sounds a
really
lot
tough,
like
a tough place to be in.
it sounds a lot like setting boundaries because man, I've definitely seen that with our kids. We have 7 kids, and our oldest is a 17-year-old son, 16-year-old daughter next. But so we're kind of in the thick of this, and man, setting those boundaries, really helping them understand what is negotiable, what's non-negotiable, I think really empowers them to realize that there's expectations, and there's still some things that they can give and take on too. So I really appreciate that. Anything else you wanted to mention about negotiables versus non-negotiables?
When you're holding the line on a non-negotiable and you're following through on a consequence that's already been pre-agreed on and that they're aware of, kids will pitch some pretty big icky fits. And out of those icky fits, they can wear you down. There's something that's called Extinction Burst. And B.F. Skinner was this behavioral scientist, and he noticed that if a pigeon went into a little box and it walked around there with its little head and it saw a little button and it poked on it and it got a piece of grain that came out, it would go over to that button every time it got in the box and hit it. And if every once in a while it got a piece of grain, it would hit at the thing for a while. And if you finally turned off the grain, what would it do to the button? It would just smack that button for quite a while before it finally gave up, realizing that it wasn't going to get a piece of grain. So the less consistent you are, the better chance your kid's going to persist in pounding away at the button, because every once in a while they finally get you to do something. So the more consistent you are, the more they're going to be like the pigeon that gives up right away because they don't get grain every once in a while. They just don't get it at all on those things. And so I'm not sure if that's making sense, but that's called the Extinction Burst. So usually when you set a boundary, a kid's resistive or negotiating behavior when they're pitching an icky fit will increase for a while. People are like, that didn't work at all. Boy, I did that, and she just hit the roof, and boy, she's making it miserable for the whole family. And then if you give up halfway through that, you've just taught her another kind of discipline, if you will, that now I need to pitch at bigger levels to be able to get my way. And if you think in your mind, I'm holding on, I can get my way through this thing, and eventually, and this actually is progress. She's escalating on this. If I hold my line on this, this will start to extinguish. But there'll be a burst before they extinguish their behavior. We're a lot like pigeons.
All right. Well, next we're on to on-the-spot situations. Oh boy, how do we handle on-the-spot situations?
Amanda's there at the house, and she pulls in and she goes, I just got invited to Mary's house, and Sarah's going to be there, and Lindsay's going to be there. And I know I'm supposed to do these things, but this is the first time I've been able to see these kids. And I know I didn't do the stuff in the morning, but can you please let me in, and I'll do something later for you. Mm-hmm. That's one kind of an on-the-spot situation. Another one is to where you were saying, you need to follow these kinds of rules, and they just blew it up with something that was big. Or they lit a fire in the garage, which for some strange reason up in my neighborhood, we've probably had 4 garage fires with kind of 12 and 13-year-old boys.
Yeah, I can relate. I think I did that actually. Luckily, I didn't start it on fire.
And it's like, okay, this is an on-the-spot thing. I got to make a decision pretty fast. Or do I have to make a decision really fast? It's like they come in, it's an urgent thing. Their urgency doesn't have to be my urgency. If they're doing that thing in the garage with a fire, it's like, I will not have them do this. I got to do something right now. That's a big thing. My son and his friend, when they were 6, walked across a fairly busy street that they weren't supposed to walk over on and dragged my 3-year-old daughter with them. When they got bored at the playground, they came home. And so my youngest daughter ends up showing up at our house with 2 mothers from the neighborhood who knew us and said, "Did you guys know Whitney was missing?" Any of you felt that panic when you're at Disneyland or somewhere when your 3-year-old is missing for
Oh
a
yeah,
little while, or a
I'm
5-year-old or
sure we all
something,
have.
and the whole world's coming down. And at that time, I just, our model talks about you getting triggered. And when you get triggered, your brain gets hijacked in some ways and you're not thinking that well through things. And usually we want to come down with heavy force about that and set up some really big consequences on the thing. And we're emotionally really intense. And so it jacks up the kid too. It's like, this is a huge thing with my youngest daughter. And I remember when this thing happened, my wife Lisa's like, "Kimball, take a couple of deep breaths before you go down there and talk to John and his friend." It's like, and if I hadn't had that cue to do that, I'm not sure what have come out of that. I might have really hurt the relationship with my neighbors and their boy, and with my own boy, I would have, here's a 6'2" dad with a big voice, and he's
Yeah.
a little kid that just got out of kindergarten the year before. And it was like, how do I do this? The urgency of a situation is lots of times in our heads. So on the spot stuff, even 3 or 4 minutes, it's like they're just waiting out in front. You know what? I'm going to need to go call mom. We're going to talk this over. Tell them that they're going to need to wait out in the car, and we may have some questions for them. But they're going to leave, and this is so embarrassing. It's like, well, I'm sorry about that part of it. I'm sure you can navigate that because you've had to deal with our goofiness as parents already. But we're going to talk on the phone, and we're going to be in another room for a few minutes to talk about it. On the spots don't have to be on the spot. So that's the key thing that I just want to talk to you about. Take some time to kind of think through it. Often on those, there's some pretty compelling arguments, and sometimes the kid goes, and then later you're like, what was I thinking? But at the time, with your logic and knowing what you knew, and then later on, you can say, I felt really pressure on that, and you presented that thing way differently. The next time you come in here on the spot, there's going to be a lot more questions about that before I'm going to make a decision because you just trained me a little bit on how to manage this. So you'll blow it on the spot decisions, but that will also give you knowledge and information. It'll give your kid knowledge and information. So
It seems like what you're talking about is you got to take the urgency out of it and increase the communication. And that reminds me of something we do with our kids, and it's the 4 things. So anytime they want to do something on the spot, right? And they'll rush in and be like, oh, hey, there's this thing, blah, 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 blah. Then we go, what are the 4 things? We got to know 4 things: where you're going, what you're doing, who you're with, and when you're going to be home. If you can help produce at least these 4 bits of information, then that it's going to help us make a better decision. But just so you know, your urgency doesn't constitute an emergency on my part. And it's hard for them at first to hear that, but it seems like that becomes part of your culture, becomes part of your part of your family culture. So
there's times where your kid's so socially isolated, when they get an invitation like that, it's like, this is the coolest thing in the world. And being able to be disciplined in that, to still ask some of those questions. I mean, there's some times where I want my kids so bad to have a win that I'll end up rushing into the thing myself and not think through it myself.
I can relate to that too. Well, that's awesome. Okay, well, let's jump to our next topic here. We've got triangulation, and oh boy, this just happened. As I was putting this PowerPoint together, it happened over the weekend. My kids were trying to pit me against my wife, and mom said this and dad said this, and this was great. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about triangulation.
Well, you actually did a pretty good job of it. These guys are masters of playing us off of each other. And, I have more of a weakness for my girls than my boy.
Yeah, I
My
can
wife
relate to
has
that.
more, my wife has more of a weakness for my boy than the girls. And some of it is like, I know how we women can be. And I'm not letting her pull that. I'm like, she's so dang cute with that. And when she does her big brown eyes, even though I know I'm being manipulated, and my kids know that. They're astute. Just like I was talking about us being able to be predict, we can predict their patterns and things and pre-plan. They can predict how we are, and who's more tired, who's more rushed, who's the one that just wants it to be done and work through the thing. And if there's some resentments going on, if there's a divorce going on, if there's other things, they know even more information about it, and that triangulation can become lethal through that. One of the things that I want to talk first about is the unity in the parenting. In divorce situations, getting the two divorced parents in the two separate households to have an agreement on those main values and non-negotiables is so crucial. And there's divorced parents that kind of get off on it, that she'd rather be at my house than yours. And the other parent's like, well, I'm the one that's a disciplinarian here. I'm the one that's pointing her towards these kinds of things or him towards that. And you're so lax on the rules. And it's like, yeah, but that's maybe my own way of having a relationship. That ends up creating some confusion for a kid. If they don't have some standards that way, they will continue to test the patterns. I used to sell electric fencing. I used to be part of an agricultural horticultural supply place, and we sold out electric fencing. With the electric fencing, people would be like, this cost me to run this fence around this pasture. And so can't you, once they've got zapped in their nose a couple of times, aren't we okay? With a cow, there will be one cow out of 50 that will, about every 4 to 5 hours, test that fence to get zapped. And that cow out of the 50 will probably wait for 2 or 3 days before they test the fence again with their nose. But they have a short attention span, and those cows that keep testing the fence, and if it's on and off, don't produce as much milk. They're not as good for beef. They don't gain weight in the ways they're supposed to. They're less happy cows. It's the same with people. We're a lot like cows. We continually want to test limits. Each of us, when we get to different work situations and stuff, find out how far we can go with those limits. Our kids are doing that on a regular basis. So that's an important point just to keep in mind as we're talking through this.
I love it. I love it. I mean, this whole triangulation thing is like, I think the bane of most parents' existence, especially divorced parents, because kids really definitely know how to pit parents against each other. And I've found it like, if similar to pre-planning, if you have the opportunity to talk to them about that and say, look, when you pull the dad said this or mom said this card, that's going to trigger me, and it's going to not turn out very well. I want good information and maybe some opportunity to confirm what you're talking about with the other parent, because we're interested in your best,
I think this is one of the most tough for all of us because of the exhaustion factor and our schedules, and sometimes the little wedges that might come in our own relationships. And it's like, I got to remember about this triangulation. And when we sit down with this kid about it, it's like your dad and I talked, and we don't like that you got triangulated. It's like, oh, well, thanks, mom, for doing this. And that now I'm actually triangulating because I wasn't a part of that. Maybe she does that and I follow up it if our schedules are just too off. But it's crucial that you end up with a unified front that's calling the kid on the triangulation. They need to know how that you felt worked by it, and that you didn't feel respected by that, and that was hurtful to both you and your spouse. And and I care about my wife, and I don't want to see her stuck in the middle like that again.
Yeah.
So it's a crucial one. It's going to happen. Just plan on it happening, and be aware
pre-plan
that.
for it. Got to pre-plan. I love it. Okay, well, how about consequences match the action? Oh boy. Consequences. It's a big topic, a big word around our house. How does this work?
So a kid promised about getting good grades, and they ended up with some C's and some D's, and they've got work that they actually really like, and they're not liking school, and they got senioritis, and they're doing some things that way, and it's like you're now grounded from the car, and you're grounded here at the house because of these grades. That consequence actually might defeat the one area that they're feeling some self-efficacy and stuff. Might the consequence be that they're now in some kind of a different study hall thing that's getting some support by one of us, or by a neighbor that's a little bit older, or that consequence ends up with some additional coursework that's happening with summer school, or but it has to be more towards an education kind of a thing than it is towards, I know this one always works. My oldest daughter, mustard works with her kids. If they put their tongue out, she squirts a little bit of mustard. It's like, don't make me have the mustard. With younger kids, sometimes that can work on several things, but it's not a natural enough consequence. And so it's not disciplining them to where you're teaching them how to navigate life if a consequence isn't matching. If I'm giving you a lot of chores at home because you were teasing your sister, that doesn't match. How do I match it if they're teasing their sister? Am I now putting in some time with my sister, and is there an apology video that I'm producing on this? And do I get to pre-plan part of her birthday? And I get to be the master of ceremonies and honoring her with her friends at a surprise party. It's like, oh, that might match in terms of how I'm doing some stuff if I was persistently really working that. So the consequence needs to logically be that way. If I'm not on time for work, I get my pay docked, or I get something that happens from that. So it takes some creativity sometimes to match what they're pulling. I'm blowing up the family, like we're talking about a kid on a Saturday that's not carrying their weight on the chores, and the whole family's not able to go over to grandma's yet because we needed to have the garden stuff completely done. The consequence to the other people isn't matching their actions because their actions were great. So sometimes we'll try and come up with consequences where we're relying on the guilt of other people that were actually guiltless to make the point. And that's not matching that one person's actions. Yeah, they inconvenienced the family, but the others were doing some things. So can I come up with a consequence about that? That's some additional duty that way. Do they get to do some stuff where they're unloading all of the stuff from the truck next Saturday at an earlier time, and maybe the neighbor's coming over to work on that with them, who they would be way embarrassed to have there, but they like gardening. So it takes some pre-thinking and some stuff to kind of outflank that kid on that day, and to not have that consequence not match the other people in the family. There's actually rules about this when it comes to treatment centers, that you can't do a group consequence in a treatment center. And some people like to use them because then they get all these peers on that one kid's case, but that's hurtful to those other peers.
Well, I love how, consequences can be so hard. Like you said, you got to be creative, you got to be planning. When we have this discussion, like you mentioned earlier, like if you're late to work, what happens? Well, your pay gets docked, right? That's a natural consequence. And when they understand that when they step out of line or misbehave, that there's going to be a natural consequence coming their way, then a lot of times we'll actually ask our kids, okay, you were, home late for curfew. What do you think the natural consequence should be? You go ahead and pick your own consequence. And a lot of times they'll, at first they'll try to sneak their way out of it and not really pick something very helpful. But with a little bit of help, you'd be like, well, how about, you're going to be maybe not able to go out next Saturday, or something like that. Something that applies to the behavior that you just misbehaved on. And
if they were already forewarned about that consequence, and you already had paired as a natural one, then it's even more powerful. So
yeah, love it. All right, well, let's jump over to our next topic, which is earns, balance, takes. This one, I honestly, I read that about 5 times trying to understand exactly what that meant. But let me ask you, what do you mean by earns, balance, takes?
A lot of our kids do a lot of great stuff, uh, and we end up focused on just one thing. Um, there's a workshop thing that I do sometimes where I draw a black dot on a whiteboard and I say, describe what you're seeing on this up here that I just put on the screen. And they're like, well, it's a black dot. Can you describe more? Well, it's about a half an inch in diameter and it's not that circular. It's not all the way filled in with black. It's like, can you tell me some more? Um, looks like you were using like a dry erase marker to do it. It's like, how about it? What else do you see up there? That's kind of it. It's like, what about the all of the white that's around that black dot? And there's lots of times where we're so focused on what kids are doing wrong that we don't look at the tons of things that they're doing right. And we don't allow them to earn privilege for that. That's another kind of a consequence, is a positive one. I've got to be able to when they're making some changes. The last call, I think I talked for just a few minutes about a kid that I was working with, and he was assaulting other staff members and trying to hurt himself, and it was a really tough thing. And he was needing supportive staff 2 to 3 times a day. Within a few weeks of time, he was needing supportive staff about once a week. It was still really difficult because this kid was a big kid and he could be assaultive and he was verbally abusive. But he'd made about a 600% improvement over those weeks of time. And having him actually see that graphed out as to how he had changed in so much of a time was a very powerful thing for him. Lots of times we don't find ways to catch them doing well and allow them to earn some privilege or some praise or some other acknowledgement as they go along. So that has to be balanced with the other consequences of things that they're leaving as they go along. Yeah. So if I'm taking away some stuff, are there still things that the kid can earn? And if I'm giving them a consequence of, I had a kid that wrecked his parents' brand new Mercedes into a tree and got a friend that was desperately wanting his friendship to take the rap for it. Mm-hmm. And the kid got charged with auto theft and reckless driving. And finally, about 3 years later, he told his family about this stuff. And he worked to repair stuff and went to the police about this stuff. That was a pretty huge, cool thing that he did. He earned some great stuff for that. That dad and mom could have just really taken him. I mean, they were devastated by it and embarrassed by that and angry with him. On the other hand, the relationship and the values they had of family were so big that it's like, even in this situation, the fact that he's finally gotten to this point of telling us about this thing and he's doing stuff to repair this is stunningly cool. He's still going to have consequences and the court's going to do some of that, and there's going to be some trust with us. But with consequences, the longer your consequences in place, the less the kid connects their behavior with the consequence unless they're reminded of it. An older adolescent will not connect that consequence with their behavior after 72 hours. So let's say that I brought the car back empty gas and I didn't wash the thing and I left a bunch of garbage in it. And the family rule is that it's easier to fill the top half of the tank than the lower one. If I'm using my mom's car, I'm always leaving in a good shape. If I don't do those things, I'm going to lose my car privilege at night for this next week. Well, 3 days into that, even though the kids, you're sure that the kid's realizing that, unless you're giving a gentle reminder about, this is probably tough on you, but it's been 2-3 days and there's another 2 or 3 days to go. This is what we have in place for you doing that. If I don't bring that up, they start to say, he's just a jerk and he's unreasonable and I don't have this car anymore. We literally have that finite of a mind that we will turn stuff into punishment. When you come up with a 4-year-old, it's within a few hours. that they start to seeing your restriction or your takeaway as being a punishment instead of naturally connected to a consequence. So at each age, these kids have to have it reconnected with them. So reminding a kid that that's where we are. You're handling this pretty well. It's another 2 or 3 days to go, but this is a tough thing with that. Instead of, well, you already knew this. It's just try and connect that consequence and remind them that it is. The longer it gets, if I'm saying it's for a month with no car use after they did that thing, then it turns into where there's heavy resentment and they won't make the connection, even though you're trying to say it. So the longer you're grounded for a month does not work. You're grounded for these things, and I need these corrective actions to happen during these next 4 days or this next week. If those aren't happening, your grounding is going to continue. But I want to give them chances to earn their way out of that month grounding. I don't want to say that up front. I may extend it if they're not responding in some ways to it. Then I can connect a consequence to a behavior. And then I can discipline, if you will, with discipline being that I'm teaching them actions. So I wanted to make sure I got that in.
Yeah, well, it's good stuff. So,
So
it's
go
balance.
back to up the ante. There's two things with up in the ante when you go back to that. One is that he keeps having the room dirty. And my consequence for that is that he's going to have to do his own laundry and that he doesn't get to do this thing with new clothes and something else tied into the messy room down there, that he's going to continue to be on vacuum duty, and he's going to have this thing here that tie into that. Some families is like, well, I'm giving that consequence, and he's not getting the message. So now I'm going to have him clean the whole house. And because he's not getting it now I'm going to have, Mr. Clean shadow him around the house. I mean, I don't know what the thing would be.
Are you
Sometimes
Mr. Clean? Because you actually kind of look a little bit like Mr. Clean.
It's kind of, if I put my white shirt on and get an earring, I could come over and help. But so there's times where it's like, I'm going to up the ante to get them to bend to my will. And I'm just going to keep piling it on. That doesn't work. Usually what it means is that your consequence wasn't one that really had any kind of decent impact on him. We all know, I mean, I'm going to drive down to St. George to our office tomorrow. I'm going to be in an 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. I have been taught by the Highway Patrol and others that about 86 miles an hour is pretty dang safe. I'm probably not going to be pulled over at 86. 92, I'm going to get pulled over, 88. And so kids also know about how far they can go with a consequence. And so if you're up in the ante on it, maybe for me, it's like they're going to up the ante by me getting pulled over twice in a little while. I'm going to comply pretty quickly. So just giving me bigger and bigger fines for the one time I might get pulled over in the next 3 years is probably going to not get me to go slower than 86. But if I got hit 2 or 3 times, you bet I'd be at 80 or 82. Maybe I'd go 83. But up in the ante has to be really careful on it. Now, up in the ante other ways, there was a family where their girl was going out with a kid and leaving their house at night. And so then there was some grounding and some supervision that way. And the kid continued to do that stuff and was taking off with the kid. Then the mom says, how do I up the ante? Well, I guess I'm going to be at school with her as she goes from class to class for a while. That was up in the ante. And the kid's like, that's it for me, So you have to think of some creative ways to get their attention in things, and not just do it to where I just pile on the same consequence, because lots of times it won't work. So that's,
I like that. So it's almost like upping the ante is kind of a card playing term, right? Where you're like calling their bluff basically, or that you're showing that your confidence in your own hand to make sure that they understand that you are firm in your decision. And that makes a lot of sense. Love it. All right. Well, let's move on. We're now on to what if they lawyer up?
The lawyering up I'm talking about is when they get really technical about it. You told me that I had to be in at this time, and I was in the driveway. And yeah, we were out there in front. And so what's the big deal of this thing? You didn't technically say that I had to be in the house. You just said that I had to be home. And to home to me is here. That might be one of the little side ones for it. Another one is that wasn't agreed upon by both you and Dad. And you said that you guys were going to give me warning before you did this stuff, and this time you didn't. And this isn't fair. And there's always circumstances with it to where they're going to do that. Particularly, they love to find us being hypocritical with these things. You don't follow by that same rule, and Mom doesn't either. And why is this thing for me? And my younger sister doesn't have to do this thing, and she's younger than me, and she has less, and I have less freedoms than she does. And all that lawyering up. I mean, they're brilliant with this.
So you're talking about just like busting you on technicalities, because man, my kids love to do that. Just whatever little technicality they can pick out that might be a little bit wrong, then it totally distracts the whole conversation from what they did wrong to this little technicality, and it's really a manipulation.
Yeah. Have any of you on this phone been where you're getting that technicality where you ended up apologizing that you weren't clear about it? And the big thing the kid did is out the window. It's like, what just happened here?
Yeah.
The pre-planning can be really important on that. Just like, listen, there's going to be some times where you're going to want to get really technical with me on these things. We're going to be talking about the spirit of the law. And there's going to be some times where that's really going to bother you. You're going to say, well, you're using that as an easy out. Well, I'm going to use that sometimes, because we both know that sometimes you're just trying to manipulate to get out of something this way. So some pre-warning about that and letting them be aware of it. There's times when actually we screwed up on it pretty good, and they lawyer up and they're right, and you just have to back off and take it and say, I'll chip that up, chalk that up for some information for me the next time I set these consequences out. Some written kinds of rules and rewards can be really helpful. You don't want a giant list that's everything technical, but at least the general ones and talking about the spirit of law end up being helpful with them when they lawyer up. Gotcha. All of this comes down to our last slide that's talking about us being able to be
nothing works without building connections.
Yeah. So if I don't have a relationship with a kid, kind of all these things are out the window. It's like, I don't respect them. Don't feel close to them. There were some longitudinal studies of about 10,000 kids about 15 years ago by, I think it was the Mental Health, National Institute of Mental Health, NIMH. In the longitudinal study, the kids that they found doing the best when they hit college were kids that and take this with a grain of salt, basically they said that it really came down to the reason I'm doing okay is if I did some stuff, my parents would kill me. And if I did some stuff, it'd kill them. So it was basically, I have enough relationship that I would have hurt them and they would have been disappointed in me. It just would have killed them to see me acting in those kinds of ways, which basically says that they had a relationship with their family and it mattered to them what their parents thought of them and how they respected them. And on the other side, it was, I know they're going to follow through. I know that. So it was, they would kill me or it would kill them if I did these things. That was the basic thing of theirs, was that it was some consistency with some consequences and some consistency with a depth of relationship. So,
well, I love it. I mean, yeah, the whole building connections part of parenting is so crucial, because really what we all are really yearning for is that better relationship with the kids. And, everything that you said builds up to that building connections. You got to have the boundaries, you got to have the values, you got to have those things that establish a good relationship with them. And then know that they have to know that you value that relationship. So it will hurt you as a parent if they do things that are going to injure the relationship. And then they know that there's going to be consequences too, that you will be consistent and follow through on. So I love it. I mean, so powerful. I mean, some of these principles that you shared, I think, have been so helpful, and really there is additional support. we do at Life Launch Centers, working in groups, is so helpful for people to realize they're not alone in these struggles. And, you know, kids dealing with anxiety, depression, really difficult emotions find a lot of support, but man, their parents find a lot of support as well. Just looking, talking with other parents about what they're doing and what helps and how they apply these principles at home. So
Yeah, it's a big thing. One last really quick story. So Lavelle Edwards was a BYU's coach, took him to national championship. I'm friends with his son John, and his sister heard her dad on the porch with another friend talking, and he said, there's no way Becky'd ever do something like that, when they were talking about some stuff. And she sat there, she was in her teens. It was like, wow, he's got that kind of faith in me. And she just heard that on the side, and it just resonated with her kind of the rest of her life, that her dad had that kind of depth of belief in her capacity. Sometimes they have to hear some stuff from somebody other than ourselves too. Sometimes that might be another kid in a group. Sometimes it might be another parent supporting you. And sometimes it might be grandma. That's one last thing. If it's just coming, I work with a girl who just tore her mom up, but she loved her grandma. She wasn't sure what to do. And I said, the next time she's in there and just kind of ripping on you, will you get her grandma on the phone? And just hand the phone to her. And so she got her grandma on the phone, and the girl just started crying and said, Grandma, I'm being mean to my mom. And it's not always going to happen that way, but it was a really tender time. So there may be other people that we can all use on top of ourselves when it comes to this stuff. We're not alone. So
absolutely, takes a village. Takes a village.
Myself.
Well, thank you so much for sharing some of these principles with us tonight and taking the time to share the stories. It's been really awesome. Kimball, you're a real asset to this organization, and I'm sure people appreciate what you shared tonight. And really, you guys, we just appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight. And to, obviously you're here, you're trying your best to be a better parent and help our kids through this crazy time, this mental health crisis that we're facing in the US. And we need all the help that we can get. So appreciate everybody being with us tonight. And we'll be doing this again next month. We'll send out some reminders and some invites. So if you're able and available, we'd love to have you again next time. So thanks again for joining us.
See everybody.